Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Hey, not sure this is happening to you these days, but have you noticed maybe a weakness of becoming that what you're trying to change? If so, tonight will be interesting to you. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see everyone. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It is so great to be back. I've missed everyone, and I'm really glad to be back with you again. So we are going to continue with some interesting concepts, which is the fact that we believe that language matters, and we're kind of looking at each word separately. Welcome to Sabbath Collective. We're a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through a Hebraic worldview of the Bible. And hey, Needs, great to see you. Hey, Aaron, good to see you too. Alexandra, Shabbat Shalom. So, of course, I have an interesting story that goes with what we're going to be talking through tonight. So, we live in a very diverse neighborhood with all kinds of people, and I really love our little community here in Seminole Heights in Florida. Hey, Rai, Shabbat Shalom. And next door to us was a young family. He was an artist, and he was white. His wife was Latina, and they had two children that were young black boys that they either adopted or fostered. And they really sort of mirrored who our community was. And I just love this family. They were amazing. And recently their landlord sold their house and they had to move. And they were only given 2 weeks to move because the owner, the new owner, wanted them out immediately. And the deal was revolving around them being out in 2 weeks. And that's a lot for a young family to move a little house full of things and find a new place to live. And they were telling me that when they met the new owner, she was just very rude to them and kind of blew past them, didn't really say anything to them, just kind of, started measuring. So I had a little bit of an attitude about her before I even met her. And then yesterday, I usually work from the laptop standing up, and I put the laptop on a music stand, and I stand by the window and look outside while I'm working. So as I'm working, I see this white woman about my age, and she lives next door to me to the left, and I see her looking both ways, crossing the street, and to my neighbor across the street, taking this big bucket of paper and putting it in his garbage can. Well, like anywhere, you're not supposed to put paper, which is recycle, in a garbage can. And then she runs back to the house, and I watch her come out with another bucket full of paper and put it in my neighbor's garbage can, and then a third one. And by the third one, I'm thinking, what is up with this woman? So I go outside and I say to her, excuse me, this is not a great way to come into a neighborhood. You're putting your recycle in your neighbor's trash and he could get a ticket for it. And she said, oh no, I wasn't doing that. And I'm like, I was looking at you out my window. Oh no, it wasn't recycle. I'm like, yeah, I could see it was paper. And then she said, well, my trash can is filled, so what was I supposed to do? And there was something about her standing there, twisting the facts, lying to my face, and then that ultimate question of, well, because my trash can was filled, it was okay for me to dump my trash in a neighbor's. What was I supposed to do? And my response was, well, you can start by considering other people and not just yourself. Boom, welcome to our neighborhood, right? Well, that's how I started off. So have you found yourself reacting like this lately? And I was thinking about it, and maybe I wasn't too strong, maybe I was a little strong, but have you noticed that in yourself recently? That you're coming at things a little bit harsher than what you normally would? The trigger with me to her was an entitled white woman. And it just made me react. And I became kind of like what I was trying to change. So let me ask you this. And by the way, give me a thumbs up if you're experiencing the same thing. And I think we all are. What's the starter of this kind of behavior? We have a great imagery in scripture of this, which we always do, right? It's the leaven process. So what does leaven look like? The word leaven, which is really an interesting thing to look at. I'm sorry, Ryan's saying I'm working on my phone and laptop. Oh, Alexandra, are we okay? Everybody else is getting it okay? Alex is having problems, I guess. What is the starter of this kind of behavior? And what does leaven look like? First, let me just say there are positive and negative and neutral uses of the word leaven in Scripture. It's all really in the context that we determine how we're to relate to leaven. And it's actually not the leaven itself that is bad or good. It's actually the leavening process that is the point, and what really the Lord is wanting for us to focus in on. Hey Diana, good to see you. Shabbat Shalom. So referencing the festival of Passover, and if you have your text that you can look at me tonight, I usually use the complete Jewish version. We're going to start out with Exodus 12:15. It says, "For 7 days you are to eat matzah. On the first day, remove the leaven from your houses." So during Passover, if you would remember, for 7 days, all the leaven gets removed from the houses, and the people were only to eat things without leaven. So matzah, if you will, is the kind of bread that they eat. It has no leaven. During this holiday season of Passover, anything that contains leaven is to be removed from the house, and ultimately actually the whole community, because they're all followers of this. And by the way, this directive is not only for Jews, it's also for people that are outsiders that are living in Israel with the Jewish people. And interestingly enough, in this verse, the Hebrew word for remove, when it says remove the leaven, is the word Shabbat. That's interesting, isn't it? Shabbat. It means to cease or to rest. So taking leaven out of the house is Shabbat, stopping work and resting. So what is it about leaven that suggests some sort of working, that once the leaven is removed, it creates an environment of resting? So the thing that we really need to understand is leaven is about work. The leavening process permeates, it changes, and it produces. Leavening is working. The process permeates, it changes, and it produces. And that's something really important to see. Leavening is actually a fermentation. For any of you who make beer, or bread, you may already know this. It involves a metabolic process where it consumes sugar, and then the products are, the thing that it produces are organic acid, gases, and alcohol. It occurs not only when you put yeast in something, and this is interesting, but it also can occur just from bacteria found in the air. So you can actually have the leavening process without intentionally adding leaven. You can have chametz, which is leavened bread, without adding any yeast to it at all. Jewish tradition says it takes about 18 minutes for the leavening process to permeate a loaf. So if you take a loaf of bread, even if you don't put leaven in it, and you leave it out, the Jewish tradition says you can only leave it out for 18 minutes. And if you want it to be matzah, you got to get it in the oven within 18 minutes for it to be matzah. So that's really an interesting concept, that leavening can happen even when it's not intentional. And like so many tactile images connected to the Hebrew words and their root connections, there's a spiritual insight in them. So we actually see this in the word and the process, what chametz looks like. So if we take a look at this word chametz, which means that which has been leavened. Whoops, sorry. I'm putting the wrong one over there. There we go. that which has been leavened or soured. It's not, what you need to know, it's not that the finished product, a leavened product, is actually a bad thing, or even that it's an unhealthy thing. It's actually something about the process of leavening that is what Yahweh is focusing on here. And it's the act of removing these things affected by the leaven that we're to connect with. And it reminds us of the point. The literal physical picture gives us a spiritual understanding and a practical application. So the first thing we see, and again, these are ancient Hebrew pictographs. Before there was Hebrew letters, there was pictographs. And the pictographs is not how we get the definition of the word, because the word is always in its context, but it is how we can see a better definition of the word. So the first thing we see is chet, and that is the picture of a fence or a tent wall. Now, for a tent wall, what a tent wall did is it walled in the family, and it also separated the family, because tent walls were what separated the dudes from the ladies, okay? So a tent wall protects, and it also means separation. The second letter we see is mem. And mem is a picture of the water. And this is this idea or understanding of a chaotic fluid power. So kametz, we see chet, we see mem, and mem is this chaotic fluid power. And the last one we see is sadeh. And sadeh is a picture of this pictograph is actually laying on its side. And the squiggly line there is a picture of a trail. That's something that we walk on, which is leading to something, which is the circle or the destination. Now, the parent root here, that where this letter is often used, connects to a lot of other words. And here's the connection. It often means to lie in wait for something, to hunt it, to ensnare it, or to ambush it. So it's not like these letters are bad in and of themselves. Hey, Lisa, great to see you. Shabbat Shalom. Hey, Rob, good to have you with us. Shabbat Shalom. It's not like these letters are bad or good by themselves, but the meaning is in the connections and the context. The letters here, when we put them all together for the word for leavened bread, chametz, the letters show a separation. We see this fluid, chaotic power, and we see a road that leads to a destination that can contain something lying in wait, a snare, and an ambush. And all three of these elements are found in the process of leavening. So let's continue with a really interesting verse here. It is Exodus 13:3. Moshe said to the people, remember this, and I'm going to zoom in on a little and let you see it a little bit closer. Moshe said to the people, remember this day on which you left Egypt, the abode of slavery, because Adonai, by the strength of his hand, has brought you out of this place. Do not eat chametz. Let's look at this again. This is really an interesting verse here. It says, because Adonai has brought you out of Egypt, the place of slavery, look what it says. Don't eat chametz on this Passover holiday. So this is really an interesting concept here. There's something about the fact that there's slavery, and it's connected with don't eat the leaven in this holiday. So there's this physical practice. There's something about what the leavening process represents that connects the people to slavery. There is an agent in the leavening process that is introduced in slavery. And it changes, as we said leavening does, the environment within those who were slaves. And it affects the thinking and the relationships of ex-slaves. It's a process going on within. And in order for people that were in bondage or enslaved to really come out, they do this to remember that they leave this leavening process in Egypt, they don't take it with them. Exodus 13:7 says, matzah is to be eaten throughout the 7 days. Neither chametz nor leavening agents are to be seen with you throughout your territory. So in other words, nothing that does the work of leavening, the permeating, the changing of the environment, and the producing is to be seen within you during this time. Moshe is constantly doing the work of digging up and out that leavening process that was internalized in every one of these people in slavery. And it's even talked about in the offerings. And by the way, if anything is jumping out to you now about how we see this today, especially with the story that I told in the beginning, let me see you share it in the comments section. Leviticus 2:11 says, no grain offering that you bring to Adonai is to be made with leaven. Leaven should not be mixed with the offerings at this time. So again, it's very intentional about this. And the reason for that is you can be sacrificing and offering a good thing. But if there's leaven in it, it's not acceptable to Adonai. So in other words, you can be sacrificing and offering and doing a good thing, but if there's this leavening process in it, it's not acceptable to Adonai. And that's a very important truth for us to remember right now with everything that we're going through in our times and all the emotional things that we're dealing with in our times. There can be a leavening process happening in us. The spiritual applications are seen in these physical laws of leavening. So let's now relate this to us. Romans 12:1 says, in view of God's mercies, offer yourself as a sacrifice. And again, we just talked about sacrifice, how there's not to be any leavening in it. Living and set apart for God. And then verse 2 goes on and says, in other words, do not let yourself be conformed to the standards of the olam hazeh, which means the everyday world we live in. Instead, keep letting yourselves be transformed by the renewing of your minds so that you will know what God wants and will agree with what he wants that is good, satisfy, and is able to succeed. So that's what the difference between having leaven and not having leaven is in us as we present ourselves as a sacrifice. Now, how many people have ever heard that leaven is sin? That the leaven itself is sin? I've heard that more times than what I can even remember in the Western church. Leaven is sin. Leaven can lead to sin, but leavening itself is not sin. Leavening is the process where an agent is introduced which causes the environment it's in to change. And that's what the Lord was really honing in on here when he was telling the people, when you remember how I took you out of bondage, don't take any leavening with you, because remember what leavening does. It's introduced into and then causes the environment to change. And that change of environment becomes conducive to produce something in us that can separate us from God, from our own hearts about who we really are, and from others. Like, if you were around when I shared my beginning story, when did I become the trash police? Right? Why did I get so pissed about this woman dumping trash in somebody else's trash can? And granted, I had a bit of a legitimate concern there, but if this was a 3, I was on 7. Why? There's some sort of leavening process happening with me as I'm trying to do the good works in this world. So and I'm sure you've probably felt it as well, right? So what is the leavening process that we have to be careful not to allow to come into us? That leavening that can come in a time of trauma, like many of us just went through these past 2 weeks. Literal trauma. That leavening can come in during times like that. It can come in during times of loss. It can come in during times of oppression. And it also can come in sometimes in times where you're trying to do good and you just get overwhelmed by frustration and despair. Is anyone else with me there? Let's look at how leaven manifests itself. Luke 12:1 says, Yeshua began to say to his Talmudim first, listen to what Yeshua says to his followers, his inner circle first, guard yourself from the chametz, the leaven, of the prushim, which is the Pharisees, by which I mean their hypocrisy. So interesting, Yeshua says leaven can look like hypocrisy. Rabbi Alexandre would end his daily prayers with this prayer, and we find this in the Baruch 17a. He says that he prayed this: Master of the universe, you know full well that it is our desire to act according to your will. But what prevents us from doing so? The yeast in the dough. So, and Yeshua is saying that leaven for the Pharisees is hypocrisy. In another text, Matthew 23:23, he says, Woe to you, hypocritical Torah teachers and Pharisees. You pay your tithes of mint and dill and cumin. And you've heard me say this before. In order for them to pay their tithes of seed, you have to count. 1 for God, 9 for me, right? It's tedious. And he goes on and he says, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the Torah. And you know what they are: justice, mercy, and trust or faith. These are the things you should have attended to without neglecting the others. Ryan says, leaven and Romans definitely jive. It feels like Paul intentionally blurs the line of sin or not sin and talks more about the process which occurs or leaven. Exactly. Because, again, it's really about the process of the leavening. It's not like the thing itself is bad. And again, this is the difference between the Hebraic worldview, which is verb-centered, as opposed to the Western Greek view, which is more noun-centered, right? So this is about the doing, the actions, definitely. Affirming leaven looking like hypocrisy. And Yeshua is saying, yes, it definitely does. And again, what he's saying here is not necessarily that it's a bad thing to be concerned with giving, but that's a lighter thing. The weightier things are justice, mercy, and trust. And in their intention of doing good, they actually became hypocrites. And that process of downloading, of letting that change our environment, and that change of environment produces something. In them, it produced hypocrisy. That right? So they were trying to do good things. But the way that they were doing it was allowing this leavening process. And this is really what the killer is for many of us today. That leavening process, that thing has come into our hearts. It's changing our environment, and it's producing things that we're really not happy with. And for many of us, we're struggling with becoming that which we're trying to change. Rabbi Arthur Waskow calls this kind of chametz the swollen sourness in our lives. I love that. The swollen sourness in our lives. So let me ask you this question. What does the process of fermentation in us look like today? While trying to do justice and mercy and faith, what leavening can happen in us? And how does it happen? You see, all of us have picked up things along the way, right? We've been wounded, we've been discouraged, we've felt utter despair and hopelessness and anger and all of it. Then when we try to do justice and mercy and faith, those things just come out in us. Like I just honed in on this middle-aged entitled white woman, and I treated her a lot different than if she would have been a person of color, some young hipster. I treated her a lot different than what I would have treated anyone else. You see, one of the really scary things about the leaven process in us is that unfortunately it can look like hating the haters. Don't allow the haters to make you hate. Don't allow the haters to make you hate. And this is something I think that right about now we're all really struggling with. And I want to ask you in your comments to share, how do you guard against that? Ephesians 4:26 says, be angry but don't sin. Before the sun goes down, deal with the issues that we've dealt with during the day. In other words, stop the fermentation process. Don't go to bed with unresolved anger and resentment and hopelessness and this directed hatred towards a group of people. Where something comes in, there's a change of environment and it produces something else. And you will hate the haters. Don't let them make you do that. I recently was talking to somebody who was about maybe 50 years old who had become utterly despondent, and he'd been this way for about 2 years because he had an awakening. Again, this was a white man, either late 40s, early 50s. He become utterly despondent because in his awakening of what happens in this world to people of color and LGBT community and people that came from other countries and xenophobia and all this, in his awakening of it, because he lived in a happy bubble before that, he didn't know what happened. When he awakened to it, instead of actually trying to become something that resists that and working within his community to change people, he went inward. He internalized it, and he grew to hate himself. You can't bring justice and love and mercy and faith into the world when you're internalizing it and hating yourself. Hate begets hate. Mahatma Gandhi said, you must be the change you wish to see in the world. And if you're turning it all in on yourself, you're of no value or good to this world. And now you've become the thing that you want to see change. The only way to do that is to make sure that what you're resisting doesn't mix with what's in you. So let me see your comments as to that challenge, as to how you find that a very challenging thing to do. How does that work in your life in a realistic way? Hey, Samantha, honey, really great to see you. Hope everything's going well and you're cooking up some goodies. And it's all good. So how does this work in your life where you realize that this is a very real problem and you're trying to guard against it happening? Lisa, I saw you posted something. It popped up, but I don't see it yet. So hopefully I'll see it soon. Ryan says, I just go with hating myself. Yeah, that's not so much. That's not so much. I'm going to get back to that in a second. Alexandra says mindfulness practice, self-awareness, and yoga. Mindfulness practices and yoga are really, really important because, and this is actually what I talked to this gentleman about doing, because it connects you to what you're actually feeling, and you don't just allow things to dump inside of your heart, this leavening, and take hold and change the environment and produce things, because you're mindful of every moment and you're guarding against downloading the hate. Okay, so that is a very important practice. Ryan says I pretty much go with just hating myself, which really is a tough thing because now, so if you look at it like this is very few people are all evil. I know even as I say that right now, we say to ourselves, I can think of a couple. And only God can judge, right? Only really God can judge with that. But very few people are evil. Most people are deceived. So it's best that we really go after evil ideologies and evil systems and not so much people. And in fact, one of the things that's really happening now that's coming out of evil is mocking people. Have you seen that? It's like people that are victims or casualties of what's going on now are being mocked, and it's devastating. So this evil wants to not only get you to hate, it wants to get you to mock. And if it can't get you to hate and mock others, it'll get you to hate and mock yourself. And if it does that, it still wins. It still wins. And you're deceived the same way the other people are. So we really need to connect to what's going on as far as this ideology, this system. It is evil at work. And it really wears a lot of faces. So we have to be very careful not to allow for ourselves to be able to hate. Aaron says the line between anger and righteous anger has been blurred so much that I can no longer tell the difference. I'm feeling that, Aaron. I do my best to have people I trust hold me accountable and check if my motivations are true or not. That's what we're going to get to in 1 second, how we have other people in our life. Very true. Alexandra says, Lisa's saying stepping away from it all, going for a walk to be in nature, or journaling what I'm thinking or feeling. Absolutely. And I know Lisa is feeling very much, you're connecting to the Shabbat in a new and deep way, Lisa, and that's very important too. Shut off those devices on the Sabbath and ask yourself, is this a Sabbath conversation? Aaron, my hardest struggle is maintaining my love and composure for the people committing evil in the name of Yeshua. Yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely. And I think our only example of that is Yeshua. The people that he went after, even when he went after them really hard, he exposed what they were doing in a hard way. Like he turned over tables and he had righteous indignation and all of it. But if they were open to learning, he would be right there with them. And in fact, Paul was one of those dudes. Okay? He was the worst of the worst. And because there was something in him that was open to seeing, God came and actually blinded him to show him he was blind. So we never give up hope, because if we hate, we become what we're trying to change, which is really, really, really important to remember. And again, this is much bigger than people, okay? These are ideologies and systems. And if we focus on people, we're losing the big picture. Okay, so the other thing, don't allow, and by the way, I could do a ton of these, and maybe you want to post some of these things in the comments. I'm only going to do 2 tonight. Don't allow the ignorant to make you stop learning. And when I use the term ignorant, I'm not exactly talking about specific people, as the whole concept of the ignorant. We have a cultural system today of ignorance. It's causing us, first of all, it's causing lazy people to be more lazy, but it's causing other people who may not have been lazy before to be completely overloaded, tired, and then kind of check out. Because there's so much information and so much false information, and every time somebody says, but what about, it takes us energy to research and find out, no, that's fake. But doing that takes a lot of energy. So when dealing with ignorant ideologies or platforms, it's sometimes so frustrating and so freaking illogical and contradictory and hypocritical that it makes us shut down. So have you ever felt absolutely exhausted with a conversation? And a lot of times you should check out. at that time and say, I'm sorry, I'm done talking because I feel like this is very one-sided. But also, because there is an attack of values, it makes one dig in, and we stop continuing to be open. The only way to be a continuous student is to stay open, to be open to our ideas being challenged, to go and learn things and keep learning things. Being open requires love. And as Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. Great quote. So again, to do justice, we have to live out loud with love. And to be loving, we have to be open. This is really challenging, isn't it? Because we want to just shut down our heart. And I'm not suggesting here that we should constantly be open to just the ridiculous and spend countless hours arguing with insanity. Because that's like an energy vampire. And that's also part of this evil thing. But what I am saying is, be careful not to shut your heart to people. Because chances are they're hurting too. And if we want to practice justice, as Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. And if it doesn't look like love, it's not justice. Wow. That's really big. It's really important. And like Ryan says, ouch. Me too. So let me ask you this. How do we see and remove leaven? And Aaron kind of touched on it a little. In the Passover traditions, there's a searching with a candle. And then there's a pointing out of the leaven to others. And then people that are more mature in the community come and remove the leaven, and then they burn the leaven outside. So in that scenario, that practical application in that scenario is really what we see all the elements at play there. Only with the divine light are we able to see the chametz that is buried in us. Psalm 26:2 says, "Examine me, Adonai, test me, search my mind and my heart." Just as one discovers the leaven by the light of the candle, that's what shows it in our own hearts. And then we need to point it out to others that we respect, that we trust. Like Aaron was saying, this is very important to be able to do. Alex says prayer, asking God to open our eyes. Absolutely. This Psalm 26:2, you're praying that. Examine me, Adonai, test me, search my mind and my heart. If you pray that prayer, he'll come with the candle and he'll show it. And then when you see that leavening is actually happening, something has been downloading in you and it's changing the environment and it's producing something there. And that production is actually problematic, okay? We call for other people to hold us accountable, like Aaron was saying. We call for other people. And then we allow for those other people, along with us, to take the leaven out. And then it's the fire of God that incinerates it. Ryan saying as if a child's heart is the only way to discover our leaven. Yeah, because what Ryan is referring to as this practice is done by children. That's a really great point. It's that openness. Again, we're not going to shut down our heart in hatred. We're going to be open. It's that openness that allows us to search for the leaven with the candles. And it's the children that do that in the Passover ceremony. Having meaningful conversations, Alexandra was saying, with people who may have impacted negatively in the past and are asking for open feedback. Absolutely. And I shared on my personal Facebook page last week, I went to a farmer's market and I just shared the story of what I saw in the farmer's market. And if you haven't read that, it's on my personal page, and all you guys are my friends. Read that post because it really connected me to hope. And that's also another thing to do, to remember who we are. And there's a lot of amazing people that are working in this world for good. And we need to not lose track of that. If we only see the bad, we're going to be hopeless. It's going to overwhelm us. So we need to look for the good as well. And that good is the fire that incinerates the leaven to make sure that we don't let it back in. So again, ask the Lord, invite the Lord to reveal it with his light. Call in other people to help you to dispose of it. And then let the fire of God burn it out by not only getting it away from you, but looking for things that are going to help disintegrate it. So we're going to close this time with the lighting of the Shabbos candles. And traditionally, in this Sabbath tradition, the mothers light the candles, and the candles connect us to the Sabbath light of peace and joy and unity. And then the tradition is she encircles the candles with her hands 3 times, which is a gesture that welcomes in the Sabbath. And then she prays as she covers her eyes from the flame, which is a symbol of ending all work. Blessed are you, Yahweh our God, King of the universe, who has set us apart by his commandments, who has given us Yeshua the Messiah, and has sent us to be a light to the world. The Lord is our light and our salvation. May his light be felt in this space as the enlightenment of truth and the radiance of joy. Amen. I want to encourage you to keep posting on this if you feel like more things are coming up. And I also want to encourage you, now is the Sabbath. So maybe unplug for the Shabbat from tonight to tomorrow night, and only focus on things that are good and will bring you hope. Shabbat Shalom. Love you all.